Everybody remembers Jericho falling. Almost nobody notices that Rahab abandoned Jericho while it still looked completely safe. And this is where calling it betrayal starts becoming a little too simple. Because when people hear this story today, they already know how it ends. They know the walls fall, they know Israel wins, they know Rahab survives. From that perspective, her decision can seem obvious, almost reasonable, maybe even inevitable. The problem is that inside the story, none of those things had happened yet. Jericho was still standing, the walls were still standing, the gates were still open, the leaders were still in charge, merchants still sold their goods, families still planned their futures, children still ran through the streets. Life continued exactly as it had before. From the outside, Jericho looked perfectly fine, and that's what makes this story uncomfortable, because Rahab started acting as if something was wrong, while everyone around her still believed everything was right. It's a bit like leaving a company months before bankruptcy, while everyone else is celebrating another successful quarter. Nobody likes the person who leaves early, at least not until the financial reports arrive. Jericho trusted its walls, and honestly, most people probably would have. The walls were enormous, thick, impressive, the kind of walls that made enemies reconsider their plans. The city believed the walls would save it. Rahab was starting to wonder if the walls needed saving too, because walls tend to look invincible, right until somebody discovers they aren't. And history is full of things that looked permanent shortly before disappearing, which is usually bad news for the people calling them permanent. The strange part is that nobody inside Jericho seems to be preparing for disaster. Nobody is panicking. Nobody is evacuating. Nobody is standing in the town square holding a sign that says, "Perhaps we should be concerned." Life simply continues, because that's what people do. Human beings are remarkably good at believing tomorrow will look like today, especially when today looks comfortable, and especially when admitting otherwise would be inconvenient. Somewhere inside that comfortable city lived Rahab. She wasn't a military commander. She wasn't a political advisor. She wasn't sitting in royal meetings discussing national security. Nobody was asking her opinion about the future of Jericho. If anything, she was exactly the kind of person most people would overlook, which makes what happened next surprisingly awkward. Because while the city trusted its future, Rahab slowly stopped trusting it. Not because she had proof, not because she had secret information, not because she knew exactly what would happen. She simply started paying attention to things other people preferred to ignore. Stories, rumors, reports spreading through the region, small details, uncomfortable details. The kind of details people dismiss when they don't fit the story they want to believe. And this is where the real tension begins, because the problem wasn't that Rahab eventually saw Jericho fall. Eventually everyone would see that. The problem was that she started believing something was wrong before anyone else could see it. Before the battle, before the invasion, before the collapse, before the walls fell, before anyone else was ready to admit there might be a collapse at all. And that is what made her decision look like betrayal, because long before Jericho fell, Rahab had already begun questioning whether it could stand forever. But if Rahab was starting to doubt Jericho, the obvious question is why? What exactly was she seeing that everyone else wasn't? And this is where the story becomes much less about betrayal and much more about belief. Because the real problem was never choosing between Jericho and Israel. The real problem was deciding which future she believed in. At the time, stories about Israel were spreading everywhere. Travelers brought them, merchants repeated them, neighbors discussed them. And the more people talked about Israel, the harder those stories became to ignore. Israel had escaped Egypt. Israel had crossed impossible situations and somehow survived. Israel kept moving. Israel kept growing. And perhaps most unsettling of all, Israel kept winning. Now, none of that automatically meant Jericho would fall, but it did create a problem. A very uncomfortable problem, because every story arriving from outside the city seemed to be asking the same question. What if Jericho wasn't as secure as everyone thought? The city still had its walls. The city still had its army. The city still had its leaders. On paper, everything looked strong, which is usually where confidence starts becoming dangerous, because confidence and reality occasionally stop talking to each other, and reality rarely loses that argument. Jericho continued projecting strength, But strength and certainty are not the same thing. A person can look calm while panicking. A company can look successful while collapsing internally. A kingdom can celebrate while slowly drifting toward disaster. And a city can look secure while quietly becoming afraid. Because walls are fascinating things, they protect people from enemies outside. They do absolutely nothing about fear on the inside, and fear tends to travel faster than armies. The more stories arrived, the more difficult it became to dismiss them. The more reports spread, the more uncomfortable the questions became. What if Israel was different? What if the stories were true? What if the God behind those stories was real? And most importantly, what if the future belonged to Israel instead of Jericho? Those questions didn't destroy the city, not immediately, but they introduced something that often arrives before collapse: doubt. And doubt is surprisingly patient. It doesn't kick the door down. It sits quietly in the corner, waiting, growing, watching. The strange thing is that most people respond to doubt the same way. They hold even tighter to whatever already feels familiar, which sounds reasonable, until familiar turns out to be wrong. It's a bit like living in a luxury apartment building while strange cracks begin appearing in the foundation. Most residents continue praising the view. A few start wondering how much they should trust the building. Rahab was becoming one of those people, not because she hated Jericho, not because she wanted Jericho to fail, not because she was secretly looking for a way out. She was simply becoming less convinced that Jericho's future was as secure as everyone assumed. And this is where the story becomes uncomfortable. Because the problem wasn't abandoning Jericho. The problem was realizing Jericho might already be losing before any wall fell. That changes everything. Because once a person starts questioning the future, they begin questioning the present too. The city still trusted its strength. Rahab was beginning to question it. The city still believed the walls guaranteed survival. Rahab wasn't so sure. The city still believed tomorrow would look exactly like today. Rahab was beginning to wonder if tomorrow had already started changing. And very soon, something would happen that would force those doubts into a decision that would make her look like a traitor, long before Jericho actually fell. And then the story reaches the detail that changes everything. Because this is usually the moment when people say, right, the spies arrive, which is true, but it is also where most people miss the point. The spies are important. What Rahab does with them is even more important, because when the spies enter Jericho, the city is still standing, the walls are still standing, the gates are still standing, the army is still standing. Nothing has fallen, nothing has been conquered. Nothing has been proven. Jericho still looks like Jericho, and that is exactly what makes Rahab's decision so uncomfortable, because Rahab does not change sides after the defeat. She changes sides while Jericho still looks like it could win. And that changes the entire story. Anyone can recognize a winner after the game is over. Anyone can identify a good investment after the price goes up. Anyone can explain a collapse after the collapse happens. Human beings are incredibly smart once the answers are available. Before that, the record becomes a little less impressive. It's a bit like selling everything before a market crash. If the crash happens, people call you wise. If it doesn't, people call you insane. The outcome determines the reputation. The timing creates the risk. And timing is exactly what makes Rahab's choice remarkable. Because the city still believes in itself. The leaders still believe in themselves. The walls still believe in themselves, which is impressive for walls. Most people inside Jericho are still looking at the future and seeing stability. Rahab is looking at the same future and seeing uncertainty, the same city, the same walls, the same facts, a completely different conclusion. And that is where the real tension lives, because there is a huge difference between following a change and betting on one before anyone else believes it. Most people move after certainty arrives. Very few move while uncertainty is still in charge. That is usually where courage and foolishness look exactly the same, at least temporarily. From the perspective of many people in Jericho, Rahab's decision would have made no sense. The city was functioning, the walls were standing, the enemy was outside. The future appeared secure, at least on the surface. But surface appearances have an excellent reputation for being wrong. Entire kingdoms trusted appearances. Entire economies trusted appearances. Entire civilizations trusted appearances. History has rarely rewarded that strategy, because reality does not care how convincing a story sounds. It only cares whether the story is true. And Rahab seems to understand something that most people only understand later. By the time a collapse becomes obvious, the most important decisions are usually already over. By the time everyone agrees a problem exists, someone has already seen it. By the time everyone recognizes a turning point, someone has already acted on it. And by the time everyone sees the danger, someone has already decided what to do about it. That is Rahab. She is not reacting to falling walls. She is reacting to signals, not certainty, possibility, not proof, direction. And that is why the spies are not the most remarkable part of this story. The remarkable part is that Rahab acts before the outcome arrives, before the invasion, before the defeat, before the collapse, before the walls fall, because Rahab did not wait for Jericho to lose before making her decision. She made her decision while Jericho still looked strong, and that is exactly what made it look like betrayal. And now, the story reaches the scene everybody remembers. The spies escape. Israel advances. The city is surrounded. The walls fall. Jericho loses. This is the moment most retellings focus on, which makes sense. Walls collapsing tend to attract attention. Walls staying upright rarely become famous. But this is where the story quietly changes direction, because what looks like the beginning is actually the confirmation. The famous scene is not where the story starts. It is where the story proves its point, because the walls did not convince Rahab. The walls did not create her decision. The walls did not reveal something new to her. The walls simply revealed to everyone else what she had already believed, and that changes the entire story. Imagine watching a storm arrive after months of noticing dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The storm matters, but the real story started before the first drop of rain. That is exactly what is happening here. The collapse of Jericho is dramatic. Rahab's decision is what makes it remarkable, because by the time the walls fall, the hardest part is already over. The uncertainty is gone. The debate is over. The answer is visible. Everyone can finally see what is happening, which is usually the moment people become experts. History is full of people who arrive after the outcome and explain why it was obvious. Their timing is extraordinary. Before the collapse, uncertainty. After the collapse, certainty. And somehow, the explanation becomes very easy. Funny how that works. But Rahab never had that advantage. She had to choose before the answer appeared, before the evidence became overwhelming, before public opinion shifted, before it became safe. That is what makes her different from everyone else in the story. Most people change after reality changes. Rahab changes while reality still appears unchanged. Most people move after certainty arrives. Rahab moves while uncertainty is still in charge. And that is usually the point where courage and foolishness look exactly the same, at least until the outcome arrives. The walls did not change Rahab's mind. They only proved she had changed it before anyone else. That single detail transforms the entire story, because from the perspective of many people inside Jericho, Rahab probably looked disloyal, possibly reckless, possibly irrational, maybe even dangerous. Yet the people trusting the walls were ultimately trusting the wrong thing. And the woman who appeared to be abandoning the city was the one who understood its future first, not because she was smarter than everyone else, not because she possessed secret information, not because she knew every detail of what would happen. She simply recognized something most people struggle to recognize. Confidence and security are not the same thing. A lesson history teaches repeatedly, usually to people who would have preferred not to learn it. It's a bit like being called an alarmist for months, only to watch the warning become tomorrow's headline. The headline gets attention. The warning came first. And that is exactly what happened here. The famous moment is not the collapse. The famous moment is not the battle. The famous moment is the decision that happened long before either one. When one woman looked at a future nobody else could see and chose to act on it. Which means the title is no longer a provocation, it is simply a description. Rahab did not leave because Jericho fell. Jericho fell after Rahab had already decided to leave. And that is a very different story. So no, Rahab did not leave Jericho because Jericho fell. Jericho fell after Rahab had already decided to leave, and that single detail is the entire story. Looking back, the sequence seems obvious. Rumors, questions, doubt, a decision, a choice, a confirmation. Simple, at least from a distance. History has a way of making difficult decisions look easy once the outcome is known. But living through those decisions is a very different experience. Because Rahab never had the luxury of certainty. She never saw the walls collapse before making her choice. She never watched the battle before deciding. She never received a guaranteed explanation of how everything would unfold. She had signals, possibilities, questions, and a future that most people around her could not yet see. That was the real conflict. Not Rahab versus Jericho, not Israel versus Jericho, not walls versus armies. The real conflict was between what Rahab could see and what everyone else still refused to see. Because while the city continued trusting its strength, Rahab was beginning to trust a different future. While the city looked at what was still standing, Rahab was paying attention to what was already changing. And those are not always the same thing. Human beings are very good at recognizing change after it happens. Experts appear, charts are created, documentaries get made. Everyone suddenly understands what should have been obvious, which is convenient. Being correct afterward is significantly easier. Recognizing a turning point while it is still unfolding is much harder. Acting on it is harder still, and that is what makes Rahab unusual. She was willing to make a decision before the evidence became overwhelming, before public opinion shifted, before the outcome became visible, before the walls fell. That last part matters, because the title is not really about the walls are simply the proof. The title is about timing. Rahab betrayed her city before it fell, not after. Before. While it still looked secure, while it still looked powerful, while it still looked stable, which is exactly why her decision appeared so controversial. If she had waited until after the collapse, nobody would call it betrayal. They would call it survival, maybe wisdom, maybe common sense. Funny how timing changes the moral label, but Rahab acted before the collapse arrived, and actions taken before certainty are usually the ones people understand the least. That is true in history. It is true in leadership. It is true in business. And it is exactly what happens in this story, because Rahab was not responding to falling walls. She was responding to what she believed those walls could no longer prevent. The collapse did not create her decision. The collapse revealed it. And that is why the famous part of the story is not actually the most important part. The spies matter. The walls matter. The battle matters. But the turning point happened much earlier. The moment Rahab accepted a future that nobody else around her was ready to accept. That was the real beginning. Long before the battle, long before the collapse, long before the city fell. Rahab did not wait for Jericho to fall before changing sides. She changed sides because she realized the fall had already begun, and that is why people respect those who are right afterward, but rarely understand those who decide before.